Good morning, everybody. This is an exciting end of February. We are having a fireside chat here with the chair of the City's Council's Committee on Technology, Councilmember Carmen de la Rosa. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We are here in the lovely NYC PIT Pop Up, which is a space that has been organized by the CUNY PIT Lab. And the goal of the CUNY PIT Lab, PIT at CUNY, is clear. It is to inspire the next generation of young technologists, including engineers, designers, computer and data scientists, and others like future civil servants, with an interest in leveraging technological knowledge to pursue work in service for the public good. So thank you, CUNY PIT Lab, for having us and kicking off this amazing space with us. We are so excited to continue to do programming here. They will be hosting events all throughout Open Data Week, and we will talk about Open Data Week shortly. So a little bit about BetaBagels. BetaBagels is our breakfast series. Each event features government employees or local leaders who are using technology, data, or design to transform New York City government from inside to out. We take a lot of inspiration from our friends out in LA who do data and donuts, because LA is a donut town. We are a bagel town. Did you have a bagel this morning?
I didn't.
Oh,
Should have.
That's okay. I had a bagel this morning from Nala's Bagels over on Church Street. They're not a sponsor, but maybe they should be. So to further kick things off, BetaNYC is a civic technology nonprofit organization. We're a team of New Yorkers, 7 full-time staff, and 2 civic innovation fellows who are with us here in the room from the College of Staten Island. Woo! BetaNYC's mission is to make sure it is easier for all New Yorkers to access information and use open data. Our history grounds all of our work. BetaNYC acknowledges the land politically designated as New York City to be the homeland of the Lenape, who were violently displaced as a result of European settler colonialism over the course of 400 years. The Lenape are a diaspora people who remain closely connected with this land and are its rightful stewards. New York City is home to over 115,000 intertribal Native Americans, First Nation, and Indigenous peoples, the largest population of any city across Turtle Island. Some have been born here with family roots that go back for generations. Others have come to New York City to find out what they couldn't find anywhere else. Each one contributes to the rich and diverse culture that is New York City's urban Native community today. BetaNYC pays respect to all Native peoples, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout the Indigenous diaspora. We offer our care and gratitude to the Indigenous peoples of many nations who continue to act as the stewards of the land to this day, and we encourage you to learn more about these vibrant communities among us. We also pay respect to the indentured servants and enslaved people who were brought here to these lands to build the city that we know today. We also give thanks to our ancestral mothers who fought for and continue to fight for universal suffrage and human rights. Our fight for our future is not siloed. Equality, equity, and opportunity are all interconnected. And with that, it is an immense pleasure, as I've said before, to have Councilmember de la Rosa here with us. Would you like me to read your bio? Or would you like to...
Don't read the bio.
Okay, great. How would you like to introduce yourself then?
I'm Carmen de la Rosa. I'm the council member for District 10 in Upper Manhattan, Inwood, Washington Heights, and Marble Hill. You could just call me Carmen.
Carmen.
Yeah.
All right, great. I will do that. You have a very unique lived experience in the sense that you're an immigrant. You were also an advocate. You entered public service early in your career. You worked in Albany, and now you're here in City Hall. How has that journey influenced your understanding of how technology should be used for the public good?
Yeah. Well, my journey began in the Dominican Republic. I was born in the Dominican Republic. I was actually adopted by a family, also Dominican, and we all immigrated to the United States looking for better opportunity, looking for that American dream we get sold abroad. And we landed in Washington Heights. And that, at that time, that was where the Dominican diaspora, by the way, today is Dominican Independence Day.
Oh.
So que viva Quisqueya to all my Dominicans out there. So Dominicans at that time, they're settling in Washington Heights and Inwood. It was kind of like the cradle community. This was the 90s. And so we made community there. And my father opened up a grocery store in the Bronx with his brothers. My mom was a home health aide around the city and also in Washington Heights. And so from a very early age, community was at the root, especially when you are from a community, from a family where financial means aren't the main thing, right? So we have to make do with what we have. And community rooted us and was able to get us where we are today. And so my parents still live in the same apartment on the same block where I grew up 40 years later. And for me, being a Spanish speaker, that was my first introduction to education here. I remember sitting and being like, what are people saying? I have no idea. My family only spoke Spanish. I only spoke Spanish. So that experience has really shaped what I look when I think about technology is like, how do we give access to people who English is not their first language, who coming to this country is not their first experience? Navigating government is so complex sometimes. How can we use technology to make those experiences better, more productive for people across the city? Obviously, I went to college at Fordham University. The English kicked in eventually. From there, I ended up going into government at 20. And so next year, it's my 20th year in government.
Nice. You don't look a day over 20. So
Thank you. Dominican genes. I got to thank my mother.
So as someone who's spent 20 years in public service, if you were to meet, and as you do meet college students, what specific advice do you have for them as they are entering into this uncertainty of AI and all these threats to democracy that you see?
Yeah, I mean, the threats to democracy are real. I have a 12-year-old daughter. I think about how our educational experiences are so different from what their educational experiences are today and what they will be in the future. I remember having to write papers and having to cite notes for books in libraries. Research has completely changed. There was actually a writing manual, if you remember back in the day, where how to cite the books we were using. Education has completely shifted, but it also has opened up an entire world for our current scholars and future learners where they have so much information at their hands. For me, the way I see it is like, even the way that students and college students especially critically think has to be different than when we were doing it. Because for us, you opened up a book and the information you got in front of you, we took as truth, even though we could skew it depending on our opinions. But for students doing research today, there is so much information. First, they gotta figure out if the information is real, if we can verify it. Where is it coming from? Who is the source? And so even having the ability to critically think will be different for college students today. For me, my advice always to students, and I speak to students often, is one of my favorite things to do, is to remember your own experiences. Remember where you come from, remember your communities, remember the impact that you're trying to leave. I always say to people, we may have college degrees, higher education degrees, but one thing that no one will be able to change, buy, or take away from you is your lived experiences, how you show up in a room, how you walk down the street, how you help someone else. So my advice to college students is always think about the things you do that you love, but that feel like they touch your value system, and follow that path, because that will eventually lead you to the place where you need to be, the rooms you need to enter. So that would be my advice to them.
Word. I love that answer. You are bringing all of that power to a very influential time period in New York City, where we have this radical adoption of new technologies. We desperately need a legislative body. We need our democracy to hold those technologies accountable, right?
Absolutely.
As the chair of the technology committee, your first hearing is going to be on facial recognition technology and the collection of biometric data. Can you tell us a little bit about that hearing and what are some of the goals that you hope to get out of it?
Yeah. Well, first, I think it's important for folks to understand sort of the oversight powers that the council has. Really, the agency that is under our oversight authority in this case is OTI, which is where the Chief Technology Officer of the City of New York lives. And the main purpose of the committee is really to look at how government is using technology to provide reports, data, to provide services for city workers, how we are also making sure that new technologies come into the city to problem solve for the things that our constituents are saying. But in addition to that oversight authority, I think the most important thing that the committee does is that it gives us a platform to have these conversations. The council's legislative authority is small when we think about privacy, when we think about data collection. Besides the open data law, which is historic, in our city, we don't have so many tools for accountability. The state and the federal government have most of those tools. But what the committee gives us is sort of, they call it the bully pulpit. I'm not a bully, so I call it just the pulpit. It's the platform for us to be able to have these conversations and bring some of these players in to really have a conversation about what's working, what's not, what's happening to people's data. In a moment where immigrant communities are under attack, what happens if I enter in my information into one of these systems because I'm looking for food stamps or housing opportunities or educational opportunities for our children? How is that data protected? How is the data used? And then how is that data then turned around and helps the council to measure our successes and our challenges?
Yeah. I live in North Brooklyn, thank goodness. The only thing that I've been affected by in the radical gentrification is have yet to be displaced, but many of my neighbors have. And in that displacement, I have witnessed the increasing number of digital doormen or like digital concierge with cameras being very pervasive walking down the street. When you think about how the panopticon of surveillance is now everywhere and it's being privatized, what are the concerns that you have that you want to bring up in this particular hearing?
First of all, we know that technology is not foolproof. As technology evolves, it gets better, or we hope. But when they're testing technology on us, because we have to understand that everywhere where our images are captured, where our faces are scanned, where our eyes are scanned, they're testing it on us, right? They're testing it to see how they can make it better. But in this testing phase, this information is exposed, right? It is exposed. We don't know what's happening with the data. We don't know where the data is going. We don't know where our image is going. We also don't know the biases that exist. Like we've heard from communities, for example, communities of color, where this technology can exacerbate prejudice, right? So two people look alike or have the same complexion or the same race, will those images be clear? Could we be, for example, if you walk into a store, profiled because I look like my cousin? We don't know. And so those are some of the things that we want to see. What is happening with the information once they have it? We have to assume it's everywhere, but we also have to dig in to see where it is, right? There's a law that says that if you walk into a grocery store and you're being recorded, there should be clear signs. We know not everyone follows those laws. We know that those signs are not always clear. We also know that in the city where people speak, how many, 800 different languages or something like that, there language access issues, right? So are you walking into a store and there's a sign in English, you don't speak English, do you know what's happening with your image? And so as we think about this testing phase, where is this technology being used in a way that we're not consenting to? How is our information then being shared? We talked a little bit about tenants. One of the things that we did in the state legislature when I was in the assembly was get rid of the tenant blacklist. For example, there was a list that if you had been evicted, your name would appear on a tenant blacklist.
Yeah.
And like for me, I'm Carmen de la Rosa II, right? That's very common in our culture. And what happens with those names? What happens with those images? Are we creating blacklists of sorts to say, oh, this person can't come into the store because they were caught shoplifting at another store? What if it's not that person? How do we verify the information? And so that's some of the things that I'm interested in digging in this first hearing. And then what happens after that information is collected? What do we do with it? So those are some of the things we're looking forward to this hearing on Monday to do.
Excellent. And if you're interested in testifying at the hearing, council.nyc.gov. Take a look at how to testify virtually. You can submit testimony written. You can subscribe or sign up to give virtual testimony. Every single city council hearing, committee hearing is available for you to watch. All of that information is online at council.nyc.gov. And we look forward to all of these hearings that you're going to host throughout the next 4 years.
I'm excited.
So let's talk about the intersection of public interest technology and data. When you think about technology in city government, what does it mean for the everyday lives of your constituents in Inwood?
Yeah. I mean, look, there are two populations that I'm predominantly serving in Inwood. One is a population that is not predominantly English speaking. So when it comes to language access, like I mentioned before, I see opportunity for this to be something that where technology helps us. And I know that the city has a law where the main 10 languages that are spoken, documents and things have to be translated, but there's so many dialects. There's so many other languages that escape those 10 main languages. And so how do we bring people into the government process by using technology as a tool for translation is one. The other thing is that living in a digital age, I think a lot about my seniors. A lot of the people that are living at or below the poverty line in New York City that are housing insecure, that are food insecure, are seniors on fixed incomes. And so in a digital age, how do we bring seniors into the fold when, for example, one, they're probably way more hesitant to give up their information because we have told them about all the scams that exist out there. But two, they're just not used to the technology. They're not used to having to upload a document onto an app in order to get a service. And a lot of them prefer to speak to people, not machines. And so there has to be an educational component there, but there also has to be a hand-holding component where we build that trust with folks in our community who aren't familiar with services, because the difference between a family being approved for food stamps and a family going hungry, right? That line is very thin. And so we saw at the height of COVID, the bread lines around our community. We saw our food pantries exploding with folks who really needed that meal for their family. And so I think about it in a way as like, how can we use technology to be more effective, to be more efficient, and then to gain the trust of communities who are the most vulnerable at this time and need our help?
So in our language, that's about service design. It's about making sure that we're mapping the solutions that government can provide and making sure that it's easy and that we're navigating through the process to ensure that those people who need those services the most actually have that system designed for them,
Exactly.
for them to get access to it.
Exactly.
Great. If there was one city service that you could redesign right now, is there one that's at the top of your head?
You know, I think about Housing Connect all the time. Again, my district is one of those districts where housing is the number one issue. About 90% that come into the office are coming in for Housing Connect or to apply for housing or to look for better housing. And so that system does have some kinks in it. I would love to see more done in order to help people navigate that system, uploading documents, making sure that there's a wide range of customization so that if you're someone who's living in Washington Heights and maybe you don't want to move to Brooklyn, right? Yeah. You don't want to be displaced to another neighborhood. There's a way that you can say, I want to stay within this borough, right? Or I need a 2-bedroom rather than a 1-bedroom. So more customization, or rather than just if your income is eligible, apply, and your income is the only thing we look at. So I would love to see more of that. I also think a lot about repairs and how the city logs repairs. One of the main reasons that people are looking for housing in our city is because that housing that they live in is inadequate. How do we use technology to hold landlords who are not repairing their buildings accountable? Besides having the worst landlord list, which I'm a fan of, we need other tools in order to track progress of repairs. I know that the city dabbled with My City being a new pilot project to be a one-stop shop for government. What I quickly learned as the new chair of the committee is that My City needs a lot of work, and it's not doing some of the things that were originally intended. And obviously, we're in a new mayoral administration. We don't know what the plan for the new chief technology officer, which was just appointed, will be.
Have you met with her yet?
Not yet, but I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, she starts next week.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I've heard good things.
So have I. So I'm looking forward to this.
Me too.
She has a history of service design, which is something that I'm really looking forward to having inside of OTI, something that we have been advocating for many years since Mayor de Blasio. We really think that technology needs to serve people through asking how that technology actually works for them, right? Yeah. And I'm glad that the new CTO has that existing history. The funny thing that you mentioned about Housing Connect is that your colleague, Councilmember Dinowitz, introduced a piece of legislation last year explicitly talking about having systems set up inside of Housing Connect so that way you fill out that application and it automatically applies for you. How do you think about privacy in the next phase that we're in, because you don't know where your information now exists in the world? I just got a letter last night saying, once again, personal identifiable information has been compromised. So where do you think about digital and data privacy and the opportunities that that you have now over the next 4 years?
Yeah, it's something that is front of mind. When I think about especially city agencies, you're talking about the data of millions of people, a lot of millions of people that are in vulnerable situations. Many times when they come to a city for services, it's kind of the last stop, right? They don't start at city services. They usually end at city services. So again, you think of a family that's navigating the ACS system or a family that's navigating the homeless system. That's not their starting point. And once that information is entered, then one, how do we best help them? I love the idea of a one-stop shop. I want to see that idea actually work for families. But also, what happens to that data right now is how are we protecting that data? How are we ensuring that data is not getting into the hands of, for example, in this moment, this political moment, the federal authorities, right? We know that New York City is a sanctuary city. We know that there's no collaboration between, or there's not supposed to be any collaboration between the NYPD and Homeland Security or city agencies and Homeland Security. But understanding that there are threats to our information, how do we make sure that the right amount of firewalls are in place to protect people's data? And that's something that's definitely the committee is going to be taking a deeper look into.
Great. reInvent Albany wrote a report that was giving advice to the incoming administration, and it contains a recommendation around cybersecurity processes, that the current approval process to get systems are arbitrary and essentially to get technology to work inside a city government is arbitrary and punitive. And so how do you imagine the committee being a platform that enables city staffers to work in a modern technological environment?
Yeah, that is actually an interesting question. First of all, like I said, the committee is the platform, right? So we should be having hearings around these topics. I welcome people to email our office if there's topics that we should be talking about. Get engaged with us, send us a message on Twitter or Instagram, find us wherever we are in the digital world and let us know what we should be talking about. But second of all, and we were talking about this a little earlier, I feel like there are tools that we can use to make working in government more productive, right? Like you've ever gotten an email and it's full of grammatical errors, like that is easily taken care of if we use AI in the right way. But in a government office where I have people's social security number, addresses, and phone numbers, I can't just go online and pop in someone's confidential information into a free, ChatGPT box or bot or any other bot and not expect that information to be populated somewhere else. So we have to be very careful about how we use confidential information to maybe write a letter to NYCHA about a repair, but it has all this identifiable information. So one of the things that I've been talking about a lot is like, we can't act like AI and some of these technological tools don't exist and just like put shame. We have to train our workforce to use this data responsibly, to use data that lives within a secure environment, right? So that because people are going to use it anyway. So instead of using the free version, is there a version that we could use that is cyber protected, that we understand that our constituents' information isn't going to be taken? Or if that is always going to be the case, then how do we teach our staff to insert all the other things and not private information into a chat box? So one of the things that I'm looking to do is to train up, for example, city council staff. Start there to make sure that they know the tools that are available to them and tools that are safe and protected, and that council IT, for example, is working with us to make sure that information and those tools are used properly. Because I always think, especially when we're dealing with problem solving across the city, if we put our heads in the sand and think, oh, no one's using ChatGPT, that's not reality. People are going to use what tools are at their disposal, and we just have to make sure that those tools are working accurately, that they're precise, and that our staff and our teams know what information should not be inputted.
Yeah, that's been one of our greatest frustrations over the last 4 years, is that we had many guardrails in place at the end of the de Blasio administration. There's only one piece of legislation, essentially the AI reporting law, that gave us a unified definition on what is an AI or automated decision-making system. But effectively, Mayor Adams then erased all of the other executive orders, had all of those guardrails in place. And we're then hoping that something would come out from that. We only got further legislative accountability at the end of the Adams administration through the GUARD Act. Now there's a bigger window that OTI has to set up a series of committees and really staff up an AI accountability office. OTI also has now the new responsibility of staffing up a digital equity, the Internet Master Plan office. So your committee has a lot of work to hold OTI and the mayor accountable for really good pieces of legislation that have now been cemented, that are transformative, that I wish more people knew about, because we truly are at the forefront of these particular issues in around to internet access, artificial intelligence. And something that I find interesting in my own research about AI is how far have we been arguing about automation? And some can say that it goes back to the 1600s, that skilled laborers have been concerned about automation, and that 400 years later, we truly are at the level where this systematic automation of all the things is being marketed on Wall Street as the solution to all of our problems. And yet what we're discovering is that there's just many more problems that it's creating. And very specifically, what do you think that the guardrails should be? Do you have anything that you want to add around the guardrails around AI in city government?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, I want to say that what I've been reading in different reports points to the fact that a lot of those jobs that are going to be taken over by automation are really some of the lower paid jobs. And that's worrisome to me, because that feels like a punishment to the working class of our city. I, as the chair of the technology committee, am in a very unique position where I don't want to stem the flow of new technologies coming online, because I think that we have to make sure that new technology exists and continues to evolve, continues to perfect itself. But at the same time, there have to be protections for workers. And before I was a technology chair, I was a civil service and labor chair. And our municipal government is in a crisis right now. We have large agency vacancies. And my fear is, well, are we going to just make those vacancies disappear by making sure that automation happens at a level? First, there have to be every city worker that is a unionized city worker is represented by a labor union. We are seeing more and more, especially last term when I was the chair of the committee, that AI is becoming a point of contention and challenge in many of the work contracts that the city's filling. Just last week, the nurses union came to a deal with the privately run hospital systems in the city, and AI was one of the points where they were stuck at. And so there's a delicate balance between automation in order to be more productive, and then are we taking away a class of jobs? And for some of those jobs, there are some of the most neediest New Yorkers that are filling those jobs.
Yeah.
So there have to be a balance between how we automate in order to be effective, and then what that looks like for the workforce. For example, last year, there was a big strike, the Writers Guild and SAG-AFTRA. And that AI conversation was different, because it was like, once they take our image, can they just use our image? Are they the owners of our image, our voices? If you're a singer, if you're an actor, and then use that and manipulate that for something that we didn't consent to? Do they own our image? So those conversations we're seeing are coming up more and more. And my advice to folks, and what we've been talking about, is how do we cement protection languages within the collective bargaining process to make sure that there are protections in place for city workers so that they're not just simply replaced. But we also have to train up our workforce, because even when automation happens, there's sometimes a worker that has to push that button.
Yeah.
And so how do we also train up the workforce to evolve as technology is evolving? And also, sometimes technology creates new jobs, right? We know that. And so what are there other titles, other positions that the city should be recruiting for, filling, so that we are up to date and at speed with technology, how technology evolves, and we can take advantage of some of those workforce needs that we will have.
Yeah, there's so many interlocking stories of my lived experiences trying to be a human on a bicycle in New York City and seeing the advent of speed cameras and knowing that speed cameras really do save lives. All of the facts that we have and all of the data that we have is that the automated speed enforcement cameras really does save lives. Red light cameras helps prevent people from being hit at dangerous intersections.
Absolutely.
And yet, I remember when I came to New York City that the state, there were several unions that were at the state level were saying that cameras couldn't be used for automated police enforcement because we still needed to have that cop in the loop. Yet when you looked at the data about where were the biases and where the biases continue to this day when it comes down to law enforcement and pulling over drivers, it still prejudices against Black and brown drivers.
Absolutely.
And so where does that labor replacement and automation, where can it happen that does remove those biases and help increase safety and security across the whole city and hopefully move us to a new world? I know that we're getting some questions here from the audience, but I want to end my list of questions here with what's the one thing that you want the civic technology community to start doing tomorrow to better support your work as a council member, as a legislator, the chair of the technology committee, and your constituents?
Yeah, I always say to people, when you're in a room and decisions are being made, it's important to look around that room and see who's not there and make sure that we are responsible for the voices that are not represented when we're making decisions. So for me, when I think about civic engagement and I think about our responsibilities with technology, we know that there's still inequity in the tech space. And so where are there opportunities for us to bring in the voices of women, the voices of people of color, different languages? If I had one thing to ask the community is look around that room and make space for the people that are not there. Because when we make a decision, it impacts those people in very sometimes negative ways. And sometimes it can help those people. And so that would be my ask. And obviously continue to follow our work. Help us become experts in the areas that we need to become experts in order to legislate for the benefit of our city. Stay engaged.
Great. And I will say that there's still, 3 boroughs that are asking for community board applications, which if you go to beta.nyc and read our newsletter, we're keeping those applications at the very top. We have found that community board engagement, while it's not perfect, it's a very unique experience of dealing with very diverse New Yorkers, but that experience within itself helps us better understand the needs of our neighbors, which are not always the neighbors that we run across at the supermarket, at the coffee shop, in the park. We may pass by them on the sidewalk, but the community board experience is one place where all of those people tend to funnel into. Yes. Bronx and Manhattan recently extended their deadlines, and Staten Island applications are open all year round, and you can always apply. Thank you, Susan, for adding that you can always apply to be a public member of the community boards, regardless of the time of year. And you can always show up to the community board and just meet your neighbors. I'm a new parent. I got recruited to be on the PTA, so that's a whole other lived experience. So wherever you can find the neighbors that you traditionally would not be hanging out with, go find them and learn. One question that Mike put in here as we were just talking about civil service reform is how might we reform civil service to support hiring and removing barriers that currently exist within that ecosystem? How do we transform the tech hiring?
Yeah, we did a lot of work last session in the committee on civil service reform. First of all, we talked about the fees and some of the fees to take the civil service exams and how it's so counterproductive to think about a person who is looking for a job, is looking to be hired by the city of New York, and they have to pay money that they don't know where it's coming from just to sit and take the test. And so that is something that I think we started to do some work around and the city has to do more. Are there waivers? We passed a bill last session where we created a pilot project with CUNY, where CUNY is basically training up the next cohort of civil service workers for the city of New York. So making sure that places like CUNY, where the brightest minds go to train, have a pipeline into public service. The other thing is also, there were a bunch of civil service titles that had requirements like college degree. If you're in a civil service title that doesn't require that, how can we lower some of those obstacles? And so those are some of the conversations that are continuing to happen in the council. I think when we add technology into the mix, what I would like to see is more titles that reflect the evolving technology, and that's a conversation to be had.
Great. As a college dropout myself, I have found it very difficult to take those civil service tests because I'm not necessarily qualified. I have to keep on working in private society and private sector to eventually get the points. So maybe by the time I'm 60, I'll retire into city government.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a waste because talents like yours are hard to find. And so we need to be attracting the most talented New Yorkers to be we would be so well served by Noel in city government.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. Rachel Faust, the senior policy advisor at Reinvent Albany, asks about how can the city council support the implementation of the new NYC FOIL law requiring all agencies to use the open records portal and collect new data about FOIL responses times and compliance.
Yeah, I think that this is a great topic. We hear the frustrations across the city of New York for FOIL requests. I was just meeting last week with the fire department, for example. And so when there's a fire in a community, we want to get the fire report in order to help constituents in the rebuilding process. It has to go through a FOIL request. And the FOIL requests, as you know, are backlogged.
Yeah.
They take months to get the information. By the time we get the information, we don't need it anymore. So I think that this is a very timely conversation for us to be having, one that I also look to exploring in the committee. And I think in terms of having those conversations with the state legislature and working together, I was just this morning with Senator Gonzalez, who I think is amazing, keeping the relationships between the city and the state in close collaboration so that these laws are mirroring each other and that also it's getting to the goals that and the objectives that we're trying to reach statewide.
Yeah.
But thinking about the density of New York City in particular is important. So I'm looking forward to continuing to work with my colleagues in Albany to get this done.
Great. I think the work that we've been able to do here in New York City has forced Albany and to force your former colleagues to take note.
Yes.
Let's see here. So in regards to the tenant blacklists, what kind of measures can be taken in the future to recognize that identity theft can cause evictions in a person's name due to their stolen identity? So we do something with the Housing Data Coalition where we actually get housing eviction notifications. We get housing court notifications, but we're limited to only see eviction notices from buildings with 11 units and up. And so with the right to counsel legislation, we know that while tenant blacklists are illegal,
Yes,
there are still proxies within the ecosystem that still enable those type of blacklists. And that data, the eviction data, is sometimes used in that. How can we strengthen tenant blacklists, or at least strengthen the ecosystem to ensure that anybody can rent the apartment if they can afford it?
Yeah, I think that a lot more has to be done. I think that the legislature in 2019 passed the laws that made blacklists illegal. But I also think that it's a partnership, right? Between passing laws that give tenants strength when fighting an unjust listing or an unjust, I guess, discrimination in a way, right? Because you're on a tenant blacklist, and working with agencies like the Human Rights Commission to make sure that when discrimination is present, that tenants have the ability and that they know about the ability to fight back when a landlord is trying to use this type of information to penalize basically families. But I think much more has to be done in terms of a credit score doesn't paint the whole picture. Sometimes people go through hard times, and because they went through a hard time doesn't mean that they should never be allowed to rent an apartment. I can't think of a single most impactful data point that people that are securely housed tend to thrive. You can go to work, you can go to school, you can find income, you can pick yourself up if you have a stable home. And so knowing that, we have to do everything that we can to try to make sure that people can get into apartments.
Yeah, a stable and affordable home is the pure foundation of a proper civil society.
Absolutely.
If you can't afford rent, it is the most common denominator in indicating how uncivil society will get, right?
Yep.
And it's very unfortunate that we have such a high cost of living in New York City, and that's primarily driven by the fact that our rents are just shooting through the roof.
Yes.
Let's see here. What's another good question here that's coming in? Is there any type of transparency laws that you imagine exploring within this first year?
We've started to have this conversation, and one of the things that is maddening is that the city council has a lot of reporting bills. Like, we ask all types of city agencies to report. Some of these bills, I think, are clogging up the reporting mechanisms because I think that some of them are outdated. I would love for the city council to take a look at some of the reporting bills that we've passed in the last maybe decade and see what's no longer necessary and make room for some of the reporting data that is needed. For example, I think about the world pre-COVID and post-COVID. We're in a post-COVID world, still in the midst of it, but a pre-COVID world and where we are today.
Yeah.
And so the data points that we may need in communities have changed, have shifted. And so one of the things that I like the council to do is to look at these reporting bills and see where there's room to sort of shift out. And the council recently put together a more robust data team. As council members, it's so important for us to have some of this data before the agency partners come before us so that we can do proper oversight. So when you think about accountability and oversight, having that data to be able to ask the city agency on the spot about and analyze that data is going to be super important to making sure that the spirit of the laws in our city are being followed.
Yeah. One of the community questions was data would hold agencies more accountable. And then the follow-up, that how do you think that council should be using open data for oversight?
Yeah, definitely for prep oversight hearings, it's important for us to have that data beforehand. Sometimes the city agency will come and testify and they'll say, we'll get back to you, but they don't.
Yeah.
Or by the time they do, that information is like, okay, that day has passed, right? So making sure that we have access to data beforehand so that when we're questioning the agencies, we're using that data to inform our knowledge base is important. When we're legislating, we're trying to fix an issue in the city, having the data of who that impacts, who we're trying to impact is important. And then some data that I think is important for our city to have, like in the public health space. There's so much data that we need, but like in the public health space, last session we had a hearing about Legionnaires and how it impacts communities and they have found the clusters. But like who's tracking after communities are impacted by something like Legionnaires or any other disease? Who's tracking what happens after and how is that being reported back for us to know that there's actually a follow-up that is needed to that hearing or to that piece of legislation or to what we're asking agencies to do. So for me, the other side of the legislation is data that we need. City of Yes is a big example. The city passed the City of Yes under Mayor Adams. What data is coming out of the implementation of City of Yes, that the council should come back and have that data and take a look to just to know that some of the investments or the opportunities that we try to legislate for are actually happening. That part of like the other side of the legislation is not something we talk too much about.
Yeah. There's a great science fiction book that Kim Stanley Robinson wrote about New York City, where actually the seas have all risen in lower Manhattan, where we're at now is all flooded. And it's like Venice and it's not habitable, but where New Yorkers have essentially habited are the uptown where the land is much higher and the new New York is up in Inwood. So always trying to figure out why did we go through this whole City of Yes and we have this data about climate change and we have the topology of the city so we know where the city is going to be impacted by rising sea levels. We know where the aquifer infrastructure has been built. Why are we not combining all of that data to project out what the city for the next 100 years looks like? The subway system is subterranean, so it's going to be dramatically impacted as the floods and as the water increases, but we still have an opportunity to reshape the city, and we should be planning for that 100 years. And it seems like we have at least some of that to work with.
I mean, just these past few floods, we saw these historic pictures of subways. I was actually caught in one of those trains as it was flooding, and you feel really stuck. You feel like, okay, the water's coming. Should I get out of the train now or not? And those are problems that are happening today. So we're not solving for 100 years from now. We're solving for our imminent future.
Yeah. And the technology committee has a unique opportunity to ensure that the data systems and the technology systems that agencies are implementing to help with that planning can be done appropriately. Thank you for all these questions. I appreciate this. 5 minutes. Do we want to see if there's anybody who wants to ask questions from the internet? Oh, all right. We have Edward Potter through the power of the internet.
I have two questions. I worked for IBM for years, multi-million-dollar projects. The reality is those multi-million-dollar projects, city has a $2 billion IT project budget. Basically, the cost of those is now $sign is zero with AI. The issue is the city is still spending $2 billion a year on IT. And I think it's a big mistake. These projects, these multi-million-dollar databases, etc., the cost is now basically zero with AI. So I don't know if anyone's ever going to get away from companies like CDW, which charge the city $250 million every 52 weeks. There's probably no way of getting untangled from them. But maybe we can start a pilot project where we start taking major city databases. They're just as good as IBM, just as good as CDW, and just put them out there just to experiment. Just an idea. It's like Oracle. There's no way of getting rid of Oracle. They've got you. The second question I have, and since I'm an AI guy, pretty deep into AI, program AI every single day, like 12 hours a day. And they're starting the kids in China at 6 years old, not sixth grade, 6 years old. I spoke to a New York City school teacher. She said, don't even mention the word in the high schools. They're worried about job security. I mean, taking Mandarin, okay? So I think the city is going to have to make a move on getting these kids into AI, like it or not. We know it has issues. We know all about this. But they're just going to get crushed if they do not make a serious push into getting these kids into using these tools. I don't know what's going to happen to them. They're going to be totally unprepared. We know that AI in the long run will give us all more jobs, but there's going to be a gray zone, gray collar, we call it, when people are losing jobs and AI is gaining jobs, but there is that valley in between. So I'm just suggesting that the city may want to look at what China is doing. Take their curriculum. It's all done. They finished it. And they start at 6 years old. Just
Great. Thank you.
Right out there.
Thank you. To rephrase the question, what do you think the council's role is in holding the Department of Education accountable for their AI policy, which according to WNYC is going to be dropping any day now?
Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing what they come up with. I think that he's absolutely right in that we have to be doing more. I can tell you as a mother of a 12-year-old, whether it's in the curriculum or not, the kids are learning it. They're learning it, they're utilizing it, they're much better versed in it than a lot of us. But I do agree that we have to teach them how to use it responsibly, how to use it in a moral framework in a way. And so that is on us to do. And so this is definitely a conversation that I'm looking forward to continuing with my colleagues. I know the council last year had an AI and education hearing. I'm looking forward to doing one again this year. We have a new chancellor. We have new policies coming out. So stay tuned.
Great. And then there was a question that came in as a comment. So would you support City Council publishing more data sets to the open data portal beyond the PDF reports? I think the unique opportunity that you have as the technology chair and pushing the speaker is to getting all of the PDF reports that council produces as structured data to the open data portal.
Okay. Something to have a conversation with the speakers team on. I've seen them be very open to innovation, so I'm looking forward to having that conversation.
I know that you wanted to be the speaker,
Yes.
so this is your consolation prize. Hopefully you get to champion all of these technology ideas as the...
Live in.
Yeah.
Exactly. And look, I think that the speaker has shown a tremendous openness to our ideas, to our new thoughts. I'm looking forward to working with her on the technology front. And so I think we have good opportunities.
Is she really, do you think that she has like a sense to bring many more technology bills in front of council?
I think she does, from what I've heard. She's doing something right now, which is pretty historic on the contracting side, these emergency contracts, which I think also speak to Edward's first question about how we're spending our contracting dollars on technology. I think technology contracts are something that we should continue to look at. And she has an amazing team. I have to say, the talented people that work at the speaker's office, the new folks that have come in, the people that have been there historically are going to be amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You also have an amazing team. I know that we're at time and your time is very precious. For those of you who have your hands raised, can you please make sure that you email those questions and we'll pass them on to the council member and see how we can get some answers for you. I really appreciate it. With that, we have Open Data Week coming up. Open Data Week is at the end of March 22nd to 29th. It's the 10th anniversary of Open Data Week, which is a civic engagement opportunity for all New Yorkers and virtual New Yorkers as well, as we will say, because it's primarily a virtual event, but it is something that we do celebrate here in person. And then we're going to end Open Data Week with School of Data, which is our now 2-day conference and unconference at CUNY Law School. And throughout Open Data Week and the week after, we will have an art show at Brick in Brooklyn, where Data Through Design will have 12 or 13 artists, something like that, that will be doing physical manifestations of data sets that have been inspired. And we look forward to the council member coming to speak either virtually or in person. We always have a place for you to do a keynote introduction at School of Data at CUNY Law School on March 28th. Early bird tickets are on right now. And then the PIT Pop Up is hosting a series of events. Anthony put this in the chat. If you're interested in hosting an event during Open Data Week here in this really amazing storefront inside of the Oculus, this has been going on for 5 months now, 4 months, how many months? Almost 6 months. So we've had this little storefront here, and the CUNY PIT team is looking forward to having you. This is a great little storefront to do demos, showcases, conversations, Q&A. If you want to do a podcast, if you want to do a live stream, we've just figured this whole out. So thank you, council member. Thank you, council members, team and staff. Thank you, PIT Pop Up. Thank you, BetaNYC. Thank you, participants. We really appreciate you. We hope to see you at Open Data Week. And thanks for tuning in.